My phone buzzed, a sharp, unwelcome vibration against the quiet of my apartment. It was a text, not from a friend, not from Valentine, but from a number I hadn't seen in years. Vivienne, my stepmother. The message was short, almost an afterthought. Christmas dinner, 7 p.m, the estate. Don't be late. No pleasantries, no hope you're well. Just a command. Before I continue, comment your country or city. I love seeing where my stories land. I stared at the screen, the glowing letters mocking me. The estate. My late father's estate, now firmly in Vivienne's manicured hands. It had been 3 years since I'd stepped foot in that house. 3 years since she'd made it abundantly clear I was no longer welcome, no longer family. I was 24 now, a far cry from the grieving, lost girl she'd dismissed. My first instinct was to delete it, block the number, and pretend it never happened. But then a different thought, colder and sharper, began to form. Why now? Why after all this time? Was it a power play? A twisted invitation to gloat? Whatever her reason, I knew mine. I wouldn't go as the discarded daughter, the charity case. I would go as a ghost returned, a silent witness to the life they'd built on my father's legacy, a life they'd tried to erase me from. My closet wasn't vast, but it was curated. Every piece told a story of hard work, of late-night sketching, of fabric samples and design iterations. I pulled out a tailored black jumpsuit, simple yet undeniably elegant, and a structured blazer. It wasn't about flash. It was about quiet confidence. Then I reached for the shoebox I kept tucked away, a gift from a world-renowned fashion house after my first major show. Inside lay a pair of custom-designed sneakers, a limited edition collaboration that had debuted on the Paris runways. They were a statement, a subtle rebellion against the expected, and today they felt like the perfect choice. They were a secret weapon, one I wasn't even sure I'd need, but it felt good to have it. The drive to the estate felt surreal. The familiar winding road, the towering gates, the sprawling grounds, it all brought back a flood of memories, both cherished and painful. This was where I grew up, where my father, who passed away when I was 21, had promised me the world. Now it was just a gilded cage, controlled by Vivienne, who at 51 still carried herself with the predatory grace of a woman who knew she always got what she wanted. As my modest car pulled up the long gravel driveway, the house loomed, ablaze with 1,000 twinkling lights. Valet attendants, looking entirely too polished, opened my door. Inside, the grand foyer was already bustling with guests, a sea of designer dresses and tailored suits. I took a deep breath, adjusted the cuff of my blazer, and walked in. A few heads turned. Polite claps, a ripple of surprised murmurs. Some faces I recognised from childhood, others were new, likely Vivienne's latest social conquests. Solstice, my cousin, Vivienne's niece, was across the room, already snapping selfies, her 25-year-old face a mask of practised influencer charm. Her brother, Remington, 27, stood beside her looking bored. Jayla, my 22-year-old half-sister, was clinging to Vivienne's arm, a younger, less refined copy of her mother. Then Vivienne herself emerged from the crowd, a vision in emerald green, her eyes like chips of ice. She glided towards me, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. She stopped just inches away, her voice dropping to a whisper, barely audible over the festive chatter, but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Peyton! You actually came?" Her gaze swept over me, lingering for a fraction of a second on my shoes, though she couldn't see them properly under the hem of my jumpsuit. Her smile tightened. "Try not to embarrass us this year." Vivienne's whisper hung in the air, a familiar chill. I met her gaze, a small, unreadable smile on my face. "It's been a while, Vivienne," I replied, my voice calm, betraying none of the old hurt. I didn't dignify her comment with a direct response. What was there to say? She hadn't changed, and I no longer cared to play her games. Dinner was announced a few minutes later, a relief from the forced mingling. The dining room, usually reserved for the most formal of occasions, was a spectacle of crystal, silver, and an overwhelming floral arrangement that dominated the centre of the long mahogany table. I found my assigned seat, predictably, at the far end, away from the main cluster of family. Jayla, my half-sister, was seated closer to Vivian, already mirroring her mother's posture, her expression a mix of feigned disinterest and thinly veiled curiosity directed my way. The forced small talk began almost immediately. Dexter, Vivian's older brother and the official host for the evening, boomed across the table, his voice thick with self-importance. "Solstice! Tell everyone about that new skincare deal." "Another 6-figure contract, isn't it?" He puffed out his chest, clearly relishing the attention. Solstice, ever the influencer, immediately launched into a rehearsed spiel, her phone already poised to capture the moment for her stories. At 25, she'd mastered the art of turning every interaction into content. Jayla, meanwhile, leaned towards a distant relative, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "Honestly, I don't know why some people even bother coming if they can't dress for the occasion. It's just disrespectful to the host, don't you think?" Her eyes flickered to me, then quickly away, a smirk playing on her lips. At 22, she was still Vivian's shadow, desperate for approval. I took a slow sip of water, letting her words hang unanswered. My silence was a shield and a weapon. Vivian, from her place at the head of the table, surveyed the scene like a queen on her throne. Her gaze finally landed on me, a predatory glint in her eyes. "Peyton, dear," she purred, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the entire table. "I must say that outfit is certainly a choice. Did you perhaps just throw it on, or was it a last-minute find from a discount rack?" Her lip curled, a clear implication that my simple, elegant jumpsuit and blazer was somehow beneath their standards. "You really wore those?" she emphasised, her eyes sweeping over my general direction, though she still couldn't see my feet. A hush fell over the table. All eyes were on me. I felt the heat of their stares, the expectation of a reaction. The old Peyton, the grieving, insecure girl, would have flushed, stammered, or fled. But that girl was long gone. I simply met Vivian's gaze, a calm, almost serene expression on my face. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I just took another slow, deliberate sip of water, my silence speaking volumes. It was a refusal to engage, a quiet declaration that her words held no power over me. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken tension, until Dexter, uncomfortable with the silence, cleared his throat and steered the conversation back to Solstice's latest brand deals. As the dinner progressed, I ate slowly, observing. Solstice, ever restless, was constantly fiddling with her phone under the table, scrolling through feeds, probably checking her engagement. At one point she shifted, her foot accidentally bumping mine. "Oh, sorry," she whispered, then paused. Her eyes, usually so focused on her screen, dropped to my feet. My black jumpsuit pulled slightly around my ankles, but my custom sneakers, a flash of iridescent black and silver, were just visible. Solstice's eyes widened. She instinctively pulled her phone back out, not to scroll, but to snap a quick, discreet photo of my shoes under the table. She zoomed in, then zoomed out, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then, a sharp, almost inaudible gasp escaped her lips. Her head snapped up, her eyes, usually so calculating, now wide with genuine shock. She stumbled backward slightly in her chair, knocking a fork off the table with a clatter that drew a few glances. "What in the world, Solstice?" Dexter grumbled, annoyed by the interruption. But Solstice wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on my feet, her face pale. She pointed, a trembling finger aimed directly at my shoes. "You're wearing the Paris Runway Eclipse customs," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper, yet loud enough to cut through the polite chatter. "Only 7 people on Earth got those." Solstice's voice, though hushed, cut through the polite dinner chatter like a knife. The entire table went silent, every head turning towards her, then towards me. Vivian's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable. Confusion, perhaps, or suspicion, crossing her face. Jayla, ever the mimic, looked from Solstice to me, her expression a blank slate of bewilderment. "What are you talking about, Solstice?" Dexter demanded. his booming voice betraying a hint of irritation. 7 people? What's so special about a pair of sneakers? Solstice, usually so composed for her social media persona, was visibly flustered. She fumbled with her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. These aren't just our pair of sneakers, Uncle Dexter. These are the Eclipse Customs. From the Paris runway, they were a collaboration between a fashion house and a new anonymous designer. They were only released to like a handful of industry insiders and collectors. They're practically priceless. She looked at me, her eyes wide, a mixture of awe and disbelief. How did you get them, Peyton? You're a nobody. The insult, though delivered by Solstice, clearly echoed Vivian's earlier sentiment. The air crackled with tension. Everyone at the table was staring, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to outright skepticism. Vivienne, recovering her composure, let out a dismissive laugh. Don't be ridiculous, Solstice. Peyton? Wearing something so exclusive, she probably bought a knockoff from some street vendor. You know how she is with her thrifted finds. Her voice dripped with condescension, a clear attempt to reassert her dominance and undermine me. No! Solstice insisted, her voice rising in frustration. She thrust her phone across the table, displaying the photo she'd taken. Look at the tag! It's right there. The serial number, the limited edition stamp. This isn't a fake, Aunt Vivian. I know my brands. These are the real deal. She then pulled up an image on her phone, showing a model on a runway, wearing the exact same sneakers. See? It's them. The stitching, the unique iridescent panel. It's identical. A ripple of murmurs went through the table. Jayla leaned forward, her eyes glued to Solstice's phone, a flicker of doubt in her usually unwavering admiration for Vivian. Dexter, ever concerned with appearances, looked visibly uncomfortable. Vivian, however, remained defiant. This is absurd. Peyton, explain yourself. How did you acquire such an item? Did you win a lottery? Or perhaps someone gifted them to you out of pity? Her tone was sharp, her eyes challenging. She clearly expected me to stammer, to confess to some elaborate lie. I looked around the table, taking in their faces. Vivian's sneering disbelief, Jayla's dawning confusion, Dexter's blustering discomfort, Solstice's wide-eyed astonishment. It was a tableau of their collective shock and judgment. For years they had seen me as nothing, as a burden, as someone to be dismissed and forgotten. Now a simple pair of shoes had shattered their carefully constructed narrative. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I set my water glass down with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. You know, I began, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension, this has been illuminating. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against the polished floor, a surprisingly loud sound. Thank you all for the meal. I stood up, adjusting the elegant drape of my jumpsuit. My gaze swept over each of them, lingering on Vivian for a moment, then on Solstice, who was still staring at me as if I were a ghost. Oh, and by the way, I added, almost as an afterthought, my voice casual, as if I were discussing the weather, I hope my latest Vogue feature wasn't too hard to miss. With that, I turned, leaving them stunned and speechless at the table. I walked towards the grand double doors of the dining room, my custom sneakers making a soft, almost imperceptible sound on the marble floor. I didn't look back. As I reached the foyer, the cold night air was visible through the frosted glass of the large front windows. Just as I reached for the door handle, a sleek black car, undeniably expensive and modern, pulled slowly up the driveway. Its headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the intricate silver etching on its side. It wasn't a family car. It wasn't a taxi. It was a professional vehicle, and the logo, clear even from inside, was unmistakable. Valentine & Co. The sight of the Valentine & Courier's car pulling up to the estate gates, precisely at the moment of my dramatic exit, was a coincidence too perfect to be entirely accidental. It was Valentine. I knew it. He had a knack for timing, for appearing exactly when I needed him, or when I was about to make a statement. But as the car's headlights cut through the frosted windows, my mind drifted. Not to the present, but to the past. To the last time I'd felt truly seen, truly loved in this very house. 3 years earlier. I was 21, fresh out of college, buzzing with ideas. My father, bless his kind heart, had been my biggest champion. He'd found me sketching in my room, surrounded by fabric swatches and fashion magazines, and his eyes had lit up. "Peyton, my girl," he'd said, pulling me into a warm hug, his scent of old books and expensive cologne a comfort. "You've got a gift, a real eye for this. What do you need? Art school? Design courses in Paris? Whatever it is, I'll make it happen. Your dreams are my dreams." He'd always been like that, supportive, generous. He'd promised me the world, and I believed him. We spent that last week together, just us, talking for hours about my designs, about the future. He'd even sketched a silly little logo for a hypothetical fashion line, a stylized P with a needle and thread. It was crude, but to me, it was a masterpiece. Then, the unthinkable happened. A sudden, massive heart attack. He was gone, just like that. One moment, he was laughing, full of life. The next, a gaping hole in my world. The funeral was a blur of black suits and hushed condolences. I remember standing there, numb, watching the procession, when Vivienne, already dressed in expensive mourning clothes, pulled me aside. Her face, usually so composed, was set in a grim line. "Peyton," she'd said, her voice devoid of warmth, "I know this is difficult, but we need to be practical." She'd clutched a silk handkerchief, though her eyes were dry. "Your father's affairs are complicated. And frankly, with his passing, the arrangements he made for you are no longer tenable." I'd stared at her, my grief-addled brain struggling to comprehend. What arrangements? The fashion school, the allowance, all of it. She'd waved a dismissive hand. It was all contingent on his direct support. And now? Well, I'm done playing charity, Peyton. You're 21. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. The words had hit me like a physical blow. Charity, that's all I was to her. The promises, the dreams my father had nurtured, were suddenly revoked, replaced by a cold, hard reality. I was cut off, financially and emotionally, from the only family I had left. I stumbled through the next few weeks, lost and directionless. My art teacher from high school, Amelia Snyder, was the only one who reached out. She was 45 then, a woman with kind eyes and a quiet strength. She'd heard about my father, about Vivienne's actions. "Peyton," she'd said, meeting me for coffee, "your talent is too great to waste. There's an international design scholarship, anonymous benefactor. It's incredibly competitive, but you have a shot. Apply." It was a lifeline. I applied, pouring every ounce of my grief and frustration into my portfolio. Then I got to work. 3 jobs, waitressing, tutoring, and a night shift at a local dry cleaner. I trained in my cramped apartment closet, sketching designs on scraps of paper, stitching late into the night, the hum of my sewing machine a constant companion. Every stitch was a silent act of defiance, a refusal to let Vivienne's cruelty define me. Grief became my fuel, poverty my motivator, betrayal my silent promise. Months blurred into a relentless cycle of work, design, and desperate hope. There were days I wanted to give up, days the exhaustion was a physical ache. But then I'd think of my father, of his belief in me, and of Vivienne's cold words, and I'd push through. One morning, almost a year after my father's death, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, a chipped mug of coffee beside me, my laptop open. My fingers trembled as I clicked on a new email. The subject line jumped out at me, stark and exhilarating. Paris bound. The memory of that Paris bound email, of the sheer, overwhelming relief and vindication, still sent a shiver down my spine. It was the first real step towards reclaiming my life, towards building something they couldn't take away. Back in the present, the sleek black car with the Valentine & Co. logo was now idling just outside the main doors. I pushed open the heavy oak, stepping out into the crisp night air. The cold was a welcome shock after the stifling tension of the dining room. Valentine Cooper, my business partner and loyal confidant, was already out of the car, leaning against the hood. He was 29 now, 5 years my senior, always impeccably dressed, his quiet demeanour belying a sharp business mind. He offered a small, knowing smile. "Right on time, Peyton." "Or perhaps perfectly late." "You know me," I replied, a genuine smile finally breaking through. "Always making an entrance or an exit." He opened the passenger door for me. As I settled into the luxurious leather seat, I glanced back at the brightly lit estate, shrinking in the rearview mirror as Valentine smoothly pulled away. The house, once a symbol of comfort and belonging, now felt like a distant fading memory, a chapter I had finally closed. "So," Valentine said, his eyes on the road, "how was the family reunion?" I let out a short, humourless laugh. "Predictable." Vivian tried to cut me down. Jayla mimicked her. Solstice got a shock, Dexter boasted. The usual. I paused, then added, "But I think I left them with something to chew on." "The sneakers?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. He knew about the Eclipse customs. He'd been instrumental in securing them for me. "The sneakers, and a casual mention of my latest Vogue feature," I confirmed. It was satisfying. Indeed, we drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights growing brighter as we left the sprawling, secluded estate behind. I thought about the journey, the years of anonymity. After Paris, I'd worked tirelessly, pouring everything into my designs. I'd chosen to debut under a pseudonym, letting the work speak for itself without the baggage of my family name. It was a strategic move, a way to ensure my success was solely my own, untainted by their influence or their attempts to claim credit. My first collections were critically acclaimed, but my identity remained a closely guarded secret, known only to Valentine, Amelia, and a handful of trusted industry insiders. The final reveal had been a calculated risk, timed with Vogue's Young Blood runway issue, a feature on emerging designers. That had been just a few months ago. The article had been a bombshell, not just for the fashion world, but for my family, who had no doubt stumbled upon it online, their carefully constructed narrative of my failure crumbling around them. The week after the feature dropped, the fashion world was abuzz. There was a major gala in the city, a celebration of the new guard. Valentine and I were there, navigating the crowds of designers, critics, and celebrities. I was talking to a journalist explaining the inspiration behind my latest collection when a familiar voice cut in. "Peyton, is that really you?" I turned. Standing there, looking a little out of place in a designer suit that seemed almost too stiff for him, was Remington Ford. Solstice's brother, Dexter's son. He was 27 now, still had that laid-back vibe, but his eyes, usually so easygoing, held a surprising depth. "Remington," I acknowledged, a little surprised. He was the only one in that family who had ever shown me a shred of genuine kindness, albeit years ago. He ran a hand through his hair. "Wow, you look incredible. I mean, I saw the Vogue feature, but seeing you here like this, it's wild." He shifted his weight, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "Look, Peyton, about everything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how things went down, for how they treated you. I always thought it was messed up." He paused, then added almost shyly, "I remember your sketches, even back then, when we were kids. They were amazing." His apology was unexpected, a small crack in the facade of the family I thought was uniformly cold. It was a tiny moment of connection, a reminder that not everyone in that house was entirely lost to their own vanity. Later that night, back at my hotel, the city lights twinkling outside my window, I was winding down, preparing for an early flight to Milan for Fashion Week. There was a soft rustle under my door. I frowned, curious, and walked over. Someone had slipped a folded piece of paper underneath. I picked it up, unfolded it. The message was typed, stark and anonymous. "They're trying to smear you. Check socials." The anonymous note, stark and chilling, felt like a cold splash of water. "They're trying to smear you. Check socials." My first instinct was a familiar weariness. Of course they were. This was Vivienne's playbook. She couldn't stand to be outmanoeuvred, especially not by me. It was still early morning, just a few hours after I'd left the estate. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying. It didn't take long to find it. The rumours were already circulating, a carefully crafted narrative designed to undermine everything I'd built. Screenshots of anonymous posts, supposedly from industry insiders, claiming my Paris collection was suspiciously similar to unreleased student works, or that my designs were borrowed heavily from obscure archives. The word stolen wasn't explicitly used, but the implication was clear, insidious. The venom wasn't just coming from faceless accounts. Jayla, predictably, was at the forefront. Her social media was usually a stream of selfies and vapid fashion commentary, but now it was alight with thinly veiled accusations. Some people just don't have an original bone in their body, she posted, alongside a screenshot of my Vogue feature strategically cropped to remove my face. It's a shame when talentless individuals try to ride on the coattails of others. She didn't name me, but her followers, many of whom were connected to the family, knew exactly who she meant. Then Solstice jumped in. I saw her posts, her stories, initially subtle, then growing bolder. Just saying, originality is key in this industry, and some things just don't add up. She was clearly trying to protect her own influencer status, perhaps feeling threatened by my sudden, undeniable presence in the fashion world, or maybe just trying to get back in Vivienne's good graces after her little outburst at dinner. Her followers, a much larger base than Jayla's, amplified the whispers, turning them into a roar. The comments section was a cesspool of speculation and negativity. A lesser person might have panicked. The old Peyton, the one who'd been cut off and abandoned, might have crumbled under the weight of such public attack. But years of fighting for every inch, of stitching through grief and poverty, had forged a different kind of resilience. I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. I immediately called Valentin. "They've started," I said, my voice calm. "I'm seeing it," he replied, his tone equally steady. "Vivienne and Jayla, with Solstice joining the chorus. It's exactly as we anticipated. This wasn't our first rodeo. We'd discussed this possibility for months, ever since the Vogue feature was planned. We knew that once my identity was revealed, my family would retaliate. They couldn't stand to see me succeed, especially not on my own terms. "Initiate the counterplan," I told him. "Let's give them a taste of real transparency." Valentin wasted no time. Within hours, a meticulously prepared industry release went out. It wasn't a defensive statement, but a proactive, undeniable presentation of facts. It included time-stamped design footage from my early days in Paris, showing the evolution of my concepts from raw sketches to finished garments. There were early drafts of my patterns, detailed mood boards, and even photos of me working on the initial prototypes in my small apartment. Crucially, it included Amelia Snyder's first-hand letters of recommendation from my scholarship application, detailing my unique vision and original talent years before my public debut. She'd even included scanned copies of some of my earliest, most distinct design sketches from her art class, dating back to when I was a teenager. The response was immediate and devastating for my family. The fashion industry, always hungry for authenticity and quick to sniff out a fraud, saw through the flimsy smear campaign instantly. My documentation was irrefutable. Karma, it seemed, was swift and brutal. Solstice, whose entire brand was built on her supposed insider knowledge and authentic recommendations, was the first to fall. Her major brand contract, a lucrative deal she'd just signed, was terminated within 24 hours. The brand issued a terse statement about maintaining integrity and disassociating from unverified claims. Her follower count, once her pride and joy, began to plummet. Dexter, ever the social climber, faced his own humiliation. News travels fast in elite circles. Partners on several of his business ventures, keen to avoid any association with scandal, quietly pulled out. His carefully cultivated reputation as a shrewd, reputable businessman began to unravel. The whispers about his sister's public antics, and now his niece's, were damaging his bottom line. A few days later, a thick, cream-coloured envelope arrived at my apartment. It was heavy, expensive paper, and the handwriting was unmistakably elegant. Vivian. It wasn't an apology, it was a request phrased as a demand. Peyton, we need to talk privately. The audacity was almost admirable. The cream-coloured envelope from Vivian sat on my coffee table for a full day before I decided to respond. Her request to talk privately was not an olive branch, but a desperate attempt to regain control, to salvage what little dignity she had left after her smear campaign backfired so spectacularly. I agreed to meet her, not out of any desire for reconciliation, but to deliver the final, quiet blow. We met at a high-end rooftop bar in the city, the kind of place Vivian frequented, with panoramic views and hushed, deferential service. I arrived first, choosing a discreet table tucked away in a corner. When she swept in precisely on time, she looked every inch the sophisticated socialite, despite the recent public humiliation. Her silk dress was impeccable, her jewellery understated but clearly expensive. She carried herself with an air of regal entitlement, as if the past week had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She still believed she held all the cards, that her status and wealth granted her an unassailable position. She sat opposite me, her expression a careful mask. "Peyton?" she began, her voice smooth, almost purring. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I believe we have much to discuss." I simply nodded, waiting. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She took a sip of her sparkling water, her gaze unwavering. "Look, I understand you've had a difficult past, and I admit, perhaps our methods of encouraging your independence were abrupt." She paused, a faint, condescending smile touching her lips. "But you must see, dear, it was for your own good. You wouldn't be the strong, independent woman you are today if we hadn't cut you off. You needed that push, that adversity, to truly find yourself. In a way, we did you a favour." The sheer audacity of her statement almost made me laugh. She was trying to take credit for my suffering, for the very pain she had inflicted. It was a classic Vivian move. Twist the narrative, make herself the benevolent architect of my success, even in the face of her own cruelty. I met her gaze, my expression calm, unreadable. "You're right, Vivian," I said, my voice soft but clear. "You absolutely did me a favour." Her eyes flickered, a hint of surprise. She hadn't expected agreement. "You showed me exactly who I didn't want to become," I continued, my voice gaining a quiet strength. "You taught me that true strength isn't about inherited wealth or social status. It's about building something from nothing. It's about integrity, about not needing to tear others down to feel important." I took a breath. "So thank you, sincerely, for showing me that." Her composure wavered, a flash of annoyance in her eyes. She opened her mouth, no doubt to retort, but I didn't give her the chance. "And speaking of things you've shown me," I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice dropping to a confidential tone, "there's something I need to tell you. Something that might put a few things into perspective." I watched her face, the subtle shift as curiosity warred with her usual disdain. "You see," I continued, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my face, "that Christmas dinner? The one where you so graciously invited me to my father's estate." Her brow furrowed. "Yes? What about it?" "Well," I said, letting the words hang in the air, savouring the moment, "it wasn't your property anymore. Not for a couple of weeks, anyway." Her eyes widened, a dawning comprehension slowly replacing her arrogance. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, her voice losing its smooth edge. 2 weeks ago, I clarified, my voice casual, as if discussing the weather. "I finalised the purchase of the McBride estate. Through a shell company, of course. Didn't want to spoil the surprise." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "So, Vivian, that extravagant Christmas dinner? The one where you told me not to embarrass you? It took place on my property. My house." The colour drained from her face. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The regal mask shattered, replaced by raw, unadulterated shock and fury. She looked utterly, completely annihilated. Her hand instinctively went to her purse, pulling out her phone, her fingers fumbling, likely to call Dexter or jailer, anyone to confirm this impossible reality. I stood up, pulling out my own phone. "My flight to Milan for Fashion Week leaves in a few hours," I said, checking the time. "I really must be going." I turned to leave, walking away from the stunned, speechless woman who had once held so much power over me. As I reached the elevator, the doors about to slide shut, a breathless voice called out from behind me. "Peyton! Wait!" I turned. Jailer, my half-sister, stood there, her hair slightly dishevelled, her eyes wide and desperate. She looked nothing like the polished mimic I'd seen earlier. She must have rushed here after Vivian called her in a rage, or perhaps she'd been following her, sensing the impending disaster. The public humiliation of the smear campaign had already chipped away at her carefully constructed world, and now, seeing Vivian's utter defeat, her own future, so tied to her mother's status, was clearly crumbling. "Can I come with you?" she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. Jailer's desperate plea hung in the air, echoing the desperation I'd felt years ago, but for entirely different reasons. Her eyes, usually so calculating and dismissive, were wide, with a raw, unvarnished fear. She wasn't asking to join me out of genuine connection or remorse, but out of a sudden, stark realization that her own carefully constructed world, so reliant on Vivian's status, was crumbling. She wanted a lifeline, a new trend to follow, a new coattail to ride. I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in years. The mimicry, the casual cruelty, the blind adoration for Vivian, it all seemed to fall away, revealing a scared 22-year-old girl who had never learned to stand on her own. "No, Jailer," I said, my voice gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. "You can't come with me." Her face fell, a flicker of something close to despair in her eyes. "But why? I can help. I can learn." "I'll do whatever you want." "This isn't about following trends, Jailer," I explained, my gaze steady. "This isn't about jumping onto the next big thing because it looks shiny and successful. This is about facing who you are when no one's clapping, when the cameras are off and the brand deals are gone and you're standing alone." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. It's about finding out what you're made of when there's no one to impress and no one to hide behind. "That's a journey you have to take on your own." I didn't wait for her reply. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, leaving her standing there, a solitary figure in the opulent lobby, facing a reality she had never prepared for. A few hours later, the hum of the private jet was a familiar lullaby as we crossed continents. Valentin was already immersed in his tablet, finalising last-minute details. I leaned back, closing my eyes, the image of Jailer's face, then Vivian's, flickering behind my eyelids. The satisfaction of the evening was still there, a quiet hum beneath my skin, but it was tinged with something else, a strange emptiness. The long-awaited validation, the poetic justice, it didn't feel as triumphant as I'd imagined. It was just done. Milan. The energy was palpable, a buzzing current of creativity and ambition. The next day, after weeks of meticulous preparation, it was time. Backstage at the Milan Fashion Week venue, the air was thick with the scent of hairspray and nervous anticipation. Models moved with practiced grace, stylists made last-minute adjustments, and the muffled roar of the crowd seeped through the thick curtains. I stood in the wings, just out of sight, my heart beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. Not from nerves, but from a profound sense of culmination. This wasn't just a show. It was the physical manifestation of years of struggle, of silent defiance, of a promise made to a father and a vow made to myself. The girl who had been dismissed, abandoned, and told she was nothing more than charity, was about to step onto one of the world's most prestigious stages. Not as the invisible girl from the past, but as Peyton McBride, Industry Breakthrough Designer of the Year. The lights dimmed, the music swelled. The first model stepped out, showcasing my vision, my story in fabric and form. Each piece was a testament to resilience, a quiet rebellion against the superficial. I watched from backstage, a silent observer of my own triumph. The collection was sleek, powerful, infused with the subtle rebellion that had become my signature. When the final model walked and I stepped out for my bow, the applause hit me like a wave. It wasn't polite claps or cold stares. It was a roar, a standing ovation that vibrated through the floorboards and filled the vast hall. Flashbulbs exploded, 1,000 tiny stars. They didn't know the full story, not really. They just saw the art, the breakthrough. I stood there, bathed in the blinding light and deafening sound, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. They didn't clap then, when I was a grieving girl with a shattered dream. They didn't clap when I stitched through the night, fueled by coffee and a burning need to prove them wrong. But that girl needed silence to grow. Me! I need it to remember. Karma didn't just return the favour. It delivered a reckoning. It gave me peace, a quiet satisfaction that transcended the noise of applause, but it came at a cost I didn't expect. The realisation that true revenge isn't about their pain, but about your own liberation. It means moving on so completely, building a life so far beyond their reach, that they wonder if they ever truly hurt you at all. And in that detachment, I found a different kind of victory, a peace that was entirely my own.